as you may have seen by the title or thumbnail, probably the title, I'm just going to chat a little bit about my experience running Daggerheart. Yeah, this is kind of like an off-the-cusp type of video. I've not planned anything here, namely because I just don't think, as a sort of like first impression type video, I would rather just be a little bit more what comes to mind. I probably will do a more in-depth video talking about it and my experience over time when I get it. Yeah, I might do a more in-depth review when I get the book, which I haven't got yet because it's sold out. So I'm getting, I think, the second wave, so I don't know when that will arrive, but when I get a chance to probably sit down and read through it all, I will maybe do a better review of that. But what I will say is what I've had in my experience so far. So whilst I don't have the physical book, I actually do have the digital one on Demiplane, which is sort of kind of like, if you're familiar with D&D Beyond, it's like D&D Beyond for other systems like Vampire the Masquerade, Pathfinder and such. It's basically D&D Beyond for literally, well, not every other system, but a number of other systems and companies. So if you're familiar with that, you'll be familiar with the kind of idea of this. So for those of you that are not, it's basically like a website where you have the content of a book and usually a character builder. And that's basically what it is. So, I have it on there, and the reason I have it on there is, I guess, kind of like a disclaimer at the beginning. It's not really much of a disclaimer, I guess. It's more just me saying. So, if you are familiar with Daggerheart, let me just maybe start off with that. Daggerheart is a relatively new TTRPG system brought out by Darrington Press, which is basically the Critical Role company. Critical Role's game making company. They made Obscura Candelabra, which I haven't played, which I don't have. Which has had, I think, mixed reviews. I don't know, because I've not played it or seen anything about it, so I'm unsure on that. But with Daggerheart, that is their sort of fantasy styled system, very much similar to D&D in that regard. So that's basically what it is. Now, they did a partnership with Demiplane with, I think there was another company, it might have been Drive Through, and Start Playing Games. For those of you that are unfamiliar, I am a Start Playing Games Dungeon Master or Game Master. I run games on Start Playing Games, that's my job. I run D&D, more or less, just D&D for a living, a bunch of different campaigns, and I run about 12 games a week. That's my job. And so, because I'm on Start Playing Games, there was an event for it wherein you, as a Dungeon Master or a Game Master on the website, you could essentially sign up for the event. I signed up and I got in, so I was one of 150 Game Masters that got the content of the book early. So we got like a PDF of all the core rules, and so I got a chance to read it about 2 or 3 weeks before anyone else got their hands on it. Obviously, there was an NDA, so I couldn't talk about it beforehand. So now that everything's out in the open, the event's kind of, I guess, I don't actually know if it's technically still on or not. It's usually a couple of weeks, and it's definitely been that. Maybe about a month. I can't remember. I'd have to check. But definitely, people are still running it and getting into the swing of things. So I got that book a little bit early. I've read through it, and I got the starter set, which is like the quick start adventure. the Sablewood Messengers, which came out with the beta like a year ago. But I have been running that and had a chance to run the full finalised system of Daggerheart. So, I've only run a handful of sessions with it, but I can easily say, like right off the bat, it's quickly becoming one of my favourite game systems, and there are a number of reasons for that. First things first, it's not a system for everyone. No TTRPG system will be a system for everyone. If you like really, really rules heavy, very tightly made, there's a rule for everything, lots of number crunch type systems, for example, you will like Pathfinder. If you don't like that, and you like things to be a bit more loose or up to the game master, or a bit more rule of cool, or just having more room for that, then you're not going to enjoy Pathfinder as much. And this system is very much like that. I mean, every system is kind of like that. It's a very rules medium to rules light system that focuses more on narrative storytelling than anything else. There are a few key changes between this and I'll probably just reference 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, because that's typically what most people are familiar with, though I may allude to things like Star Trek Adventures and a few other things for some reasons that you'll understand. And again, I'm not going into full depth review. This is just my first impressions of running it a few times, and eventually I'm gonna, like with the book, maybe talk a little bit more in depth about it. Now this video's gone on long enough without me actually talking about the content of the game, so I'm gonna just jump straight in. So almost immediately from running it, I knew that this was a system I'm going to use a lot of. I've already put up a number of games for it because I really, really, really like it, guys. I really like it. It's rivaling Dungeons and Dragons for me. Now I like D&D 5e because there is enough rules there for structure, for creativity, but also things where there's not as much pressure on me to go, here is the ruling, you know. I will make it up, and that typically is the area that I prefer to sit in when I'm running games. I do like Pathfinder, but I much prefer playing Pathfinder than I do running it, because you just have to know a lot of stuff. D&D is not quite as stressful in that regard, I would say anyway, but there are still a lot of rules. Daggerheart is not quite to that level. Daggerheart is definitely a lighter rule system than 5e. So that's one thing that I like about it. There's a lot more focus on the moment rather than, let me go and check that ruling, let me go and check how that rule works. For example, I'll give you an example here. Conditions in 5e, I've got a Dungeon Master screen ahead of me, so I'll just use this as a point of reference. In D&D, for example, here are a bunch of 5e conditions: blinded, charmed, deafened, exhaustion, frightened, grappled, incapacitated, invisible, paralysed, petrified, poisoned, prone, restrained, stunned, and unconscious. That is a list of that, and that actually doesn't include another one, which is hidden, the hidden condition, which for some reason they haven't put on there, probably because of room, but that technically is another condition. And some of those conditions have various elements to it depending on the spell that you cast. So it might be frightened, but during the frightened condition they also have to move away, as is something like turn undead. And I guess you could argue that turned is another condition from that. So the point being is there's a bunch of conditions. In Daggerheart, there's like 3, I think. I think one of them is hidden, one of them is restrained, and the other one is, I think it might be unconscious. I can't remember off the top of my head. Restrained basically just means, or vulnerable, that's the other one, vulnerable. onus of the GM and the players to determine what, not mechanically, but what that flavourfully means. So if you're hit with a poison dart and it says, and the target becomes vulnerable, well then we would say that in the flavour they're now poisoned. The vulnerability comes because they've been poisoned by a dart, versus like they're vulnerable because you knocked them prone, or they're vulnerable because you tied them in, or you've I don't know, like you. I can't think of a good example here, but like every ability, you then just flavour what the vulnerability is, rather than there being distinct conditions with different effects, which in 5e works because of the way in which the rules detail spells and stuff, whereas in this it's a little bit more like, okay, so how would you say that they're vulnerable? And that becomes a very, very basic premise of the entire game, which is character flavour, and the GM giving the chance for characters to build on the world and to flavour things, and everything's about the narrative. The mechanics inform the narrative. Talking of the mechanics informing the narrative, there's a lot to do with roleplay and how that ties into special abilities. So for example, there is a warrior ability that requires you to complement another character in order to activate it. So that, I think it says like, describe a way that you complement another character's like actions in combat and gain 3 hope. So in order to activate that card, the character has to engage in roleplay, and that is something else that I really love. I wish that Dungeons and Dragons did this, even to this day, despite all of the other ways that D&D has tried to incorporate roleplay or like non-combat encounters. Sorry, there's something going on outside. Incorporate non-combat encounters into their abilities, particularly with martial characters. Like the fighter can use their second wind to gain themselves a bonus on a skill check now, or the same thing with barbarians and rage. As much as they've tried to do that, one thing they've still never done is incorporate the necessity of roleplay within abilities. Second wind, it doesn't say describe the way that your character catches their breath. The onus is on the GM to say that, rather than the character having to do that in order to activate their ability. And some of that's because they go, well, you play the way that you want to play, and that's fine, that's perfectly fine. If you're just playing a war game version of D&D, that's how it'll work. But in Daggerheart, it's not like that. If you want to activate that ability, you better describe it, complement a character, that's what the ability is. And so, like, things like that are incorporated a lot into the game, particularly in things like downtime, where you can describe how you're preparing with another character, and you gain more, like, you benefit more from role-playing. And so a lot of abilities require you to distinctly interact with other characters or interact with the world. In that same vein, characters or the GM will periodically, and this is built into the system, will periodically say, you notice something about the woods you're travelling in, what is it? Now that is not something that has to be unique to Daggerheart, but it is something that is really like encouraged in the rules, where the GM is encouraged to say to the players and ask them questions to help world build. Now you could take that and apply it to any system, so it's not Daggerheart unique, but it is something that system uses and like tells the GM you should do that as part of playing this game, because it highlights the world building element, the idea that the players are invested in the world because they're building it as they play, rather than the GM has decided what the woods look like. Sorry, something just jittered on my screen there and it made me nervous. So yeah, that's another good sort of example of something that I really like, and I actually have started to use that in my other D&D games. But I will be honest, it feels a little bit out of the blue in those. And the other thing is when you're, especially in my position, when you're running D&D, some people questions, not about the character's reaction, because often I'll say like how does your character feel about this, or how does your character react to that information. But I've never turned around and said, the moment you enter into the crypt, you smell something, what is it? And after that point, the GM takes that on. So for example, the first time I ran Daggerheart, one of the very first things that happens in the game is you pick on one character, the character that's driving a wagon, at least in the Sablewood Messenger's quick start, and you say to them, you notice something about the woods, there's something unique about it, about the trees here, what is it? And in that first game, the player turned around and said that all of the trees are rotten, like they're rotting, and I jumped on that and went, okay. And from that moment, the rest of the adventure kind of had this flavour that the adventurers were going through this rotting wood, and suddenly they had made their adventure, right? And everything was flavoured in that way. Starving ambushes, because the foliage was like dying, so they had to hunt, they had to ambush people to try and get some food to survive. And so a lot of the game system encourages improvisation, right? And that is a key element of this system. So I want to turn back a little bit more to the mechanics now, and something else that I really love about Daggerheart, which is metacurrency. This is a Marmite thing, right? It's a love or hate relationship. Either you will love metacurrency or you will hate it. I love metacurrency. So in Daggerheart you have fear and you have hope. And in Daggerheart you have fear, you have hope. And within this, players, I'm trying to think of a way to describe this. So basically they are the two metacurrencies. Hope is the metacurrency for players that they get to use to spend on resources, to do special abilities, or to gain advantages. And GMs have fear, which allows them to interact with the world, to do something interesting, to make an enemy more powerful, or to create a complication. So players will roll 2 dice, a hope dice and a fear dice. Or a hope die and a fear die, if I should say it correctly. And those die are D12, so it's a D12 system. You roll 2 D12 and see which dice is basically higher. Kind of. So the way in which a check would work here is, if I say I need you to make an agility action roll, the player will take 2 D12, one of them is a hope die, one of them is a fear die. They will roll the die. Let's say they get 12 on the hope die, and they get 8 on the fear die. Well, they've got a total of 20 on the dice. If they have like a bonus to their agility of +2, they've got a total of 22. So with an action roll, you add the die together, even though it might not sound like you do. You add them together. However, there is another element to it, because you either rolled with fear or you rolled with hope. If you rolled higher with the hope die, so in this case I got a 12 on the hope die and an 8 on the fear, so I rolled a 20 with hope. If I got it the other way round, it was a 12 on the fear die and an 8 on the hope die, then I rolled a total of 20 with fear. And the distinction is important. If a character rolls with hope, it means they gain their metacurrency, they gain a hope. If they rolled with fear, I gain a fear, and there might be a complication. So, for example, if a character is trying to open up a door with their lockpick, and they roll with fear, there might be a complication to that, and it also depends on their success. Yeah, so because there is like a success mechanic as well, obviously, very much like D&D. Success is every check has a certain threshold you want to meet in order to succeed. So it might be the difficulty might be a 10, it might be a 15, it might be a 20. What that means is there are 4 possible outcomes when you make a roll. Either you succeed with hope, you succeed with fear, you fail with hope, or you fail with fear, because it's still possible to, if the DC is 15, and you roll a 3 on the hope die and a 5 on the fear die, you only got a total of 8, so you failed. And you failed with fear. But if it's the other way around, an 8 on the a 5 on the hope die and a 3 on the fear die, you failed the check because you didn't get a total of 15, but you got a hope, so you still gain a hope even if you fail. So basically what that means is that it's kind of a guide for the GM, not only to gain meta currency for the players and GM, but also to guide any kind of complication. So let's take the example with opening up the door. So if a player walks up towards the door and makes a check on it, an action roll, and they succeed, let's say the DC is 15, and they succeed with hope, so they get over 15 in total, and the higher of the 2 die is the hope die. Well, they succeed with hope, but that basically means that they unlock the door. They also might gain something else as well. Maybe they get a little bit extra with the hope. They can either, maybe that might be the case. You might not do that. They might just gain the hope, which is generally what would happen. They might. The other outcome is, of course, they succeed with fear, so they get higher than the DC of 15, but their fear die was higher, in which case they succeed with fear, so they manage to unlock the door. But there's a complication. They unlock the door, but there was an alarm on the other side, or they unlock the door but they start to hear footsteps as guards have started to come back to patrol this way unexpectedly. So they succeeded, but there was a complication. I'm scratching my foot here, by the way, guys. It's just suddenly become very itchy. The other 2 outcomes are they fail with hope. On a failure with hope, they don't make 15, but the hope die was higher. It means they don't get to unlock the door, but the alarm that they knew they would trigger doesn't trigger when they did it, or they fail with hope, so they don't open the door, but as they're jimmying it, they suddenly hear the sound of voices on the other side. Now they know that there would have been other people on the other side of that door. So like there's a few things that you could give them there as part of that. Basically it means it didn't go as wrong as it could have done. A failure with fear, they fail the check, they don't get 15, and they also rolled higher on their fear die. Well, they failed with a big complication. Things go really wrong. They walk up to the door, they jimmy the lock, it doesn't open, and the sound of that has alerted the guards back down the hallway, and now they're running towards them. So as you can see, there are 4 different outcomes. The final outcome is a critical roll. Critical rolls exist in Daggerheart, and a critical roll is when, no matter what the number is, the dice are the same on both d12. So if both die roll a 1, or if both die roll a 12, it doesn't matter. If the die number is the same on both dice, that's a critical success. And so basically, that would mean that they are able to succeed, obviously, but they also get something extra. So maybe they unlock the door, and as they're doing so, maybe the guards behind hear another distraction elsewhere, and or the guards behind the door maybe have perchance managed to, I don't know, they're going away. They've managed to scare away the guards on the other side. I don't know. I haven't got a good example for that one, if I'm honest. Or maybe the extra success is that they are now going to be able to, like if someone locks this door again, they won't ever have to unlock it. They will be able to put their lockpick in and open it without an action roll, because it's now very easy. They know exactly how it works. That might be an example. It's not a great example. But yeah, combat works exactly the same way, so everything is just the same action roll, which is kind of similar to 5th edition, in that you have an attack roll and such. Critical hits work the way that I homebrew them in my home games of D&D, which is you always get the maximum of the dice roll, and then you roll die afterwards. So if your damage was a D8, you instantly gain 8, and then you roll the D8 afterwards and add that together. So that's how critical hits work when it comes to fighting. Whilst we're on the topic of combat, that's the other thing that I really do like about this, is there's no initiative. So in 5th edition, when I say we're entering combat, it's time to roll initiative, everyone rolls initiative and we go in a turn order. It's not like that in Daggerheart. There is no initiative. Basically everyone goes, all the players just start, unless there's a certain situation like a creature can ambush them and they get to go first. Then usually what will happen is the players will just get to start when a fight breaks out, and the game runs as it would in any capacity. So what tends to happen is in 5th edition, combat tends to feel like a distinct moment that's separate to anything else that happens. And so what that means is they feel like two different games, basically. In Daggerheart, everything feels fluid. You might be role playing with a trader, and suddenly I'll say people jump out of the woods and are looking like they're about to attack you. What are you going to do? And instantly someone might turn around and say, okay, then I'm going to attack the guy that's charging at us. And I'll say, okay, make an attack roll. And like, there's no moment where we say initiative. But Vangoth, that's what the VG stands for, by the way, in VGASMR. How do you make the monsters move? Good question. So that pool of resources I mentioned earlier on, fear, I can use that. So I get to use that to interject, so the players just keep going. They keep going with their turns, one player to another player to another player, until two things happen. One, they fail a check. If they fail an action roll, I then can make a move. I take control from that moment, but I can only do that once. So let's say the warrior makes an attack and succeeds. They deal their damage to an enemy. Then the wizard goes next. They make an attack, but they fail. Now it's my turn. I say, okay, you failed your attack. I get to spotlight an enemy now, and I'm gonna have the druid, mage, whatever. Oh, let's just use animals because it's easier. I'm gonna have the wolf attack you now, and so I make the attack. Okay. Normally that would mean it goes back to the players again. I can only spot one enemy at a time, but I have this pool of resource called fear. I can spend a fear and say, okay, the wolf has taken its turn. I'm spending a fear now, and now wolf number 2 is making an attack. Once that's done its turn, I'm spending another fear, and wolf number 3 is making an attack until I decide I want to give it back to the players because I've spent enough fear. So the resource of fear is used by the GM in these situations to sort of create an initiative. The thing I found about this that makes it so much more exciting than initiative in 5th edition, what tends to happen in D&D, you know when you're going. So if I'm a player, if I'm on initiative count 18 and there's 2 people before me, I know that player goes, now it's my turn. I make my actions, I do my turn, it comes to an end. Okay. Now I'm listening. And now I'm just waiting for my turn to come round again. Now some people are really engaged in combat and love hearing what other people do. That's cool. But at the same time, you're still just listening. You're not waiting for a moment where you can do something. And it gets very boring. And what it also means is it makes combat that is longer feel longer because you're just waiting. In Daggerheart, you're constantly looking for an opportunity to jump in. This does mean that you have to, as a GM and as players, make sure that everyone gets a chance to do something, because quieter players might start to find themselves not interjecting. The games that I've run, my players have been very good at ensuring that everyone does get a turn. And if there's a special moment, someone might get to do a couple of actions at once. So if like they're setting something up, they might get to do that, and the players are very much like engaged in letting that happen. But you have to be very much on top of ensuring that no one gets sidelined. That's the difficulty there, but the payoff is so much better. Honestly, it's really hard for me to go back to initiative in 5e after doing it, because it's so fluid, it's so creative. The pools of resources that you get to use as a GM. I'll give you an example. In the game that we played, a player, like, there was an ability where an enemy managed to like knock back a bunch of players, and one of them went flying into a back wall, and I decided I was going to spend a fear to create a complication, an environmental danger there. So as a fear, I said, okay, you hit the wall so hard it's created a rock slide, so I spend a fear to create a basic damage here. I need you to make a reaction, an agility reaction roll, which is basically like a saving throw, and they managed to make it out the way in time, and didn't get hit by it. But the point was, like, if I was doing that in D&D, it would feel cheap. If I said, alright, you got knocked back by this attack, you hit the wall, and suddenly, like, there's a rock slide that hits you, because I'm not spending anything, because I'm not having to use a resource, it feels like a cheap way of doing it. Now, if you were in a very obviously rock slide area, and I had denoted that beforehand, it's a little bit different. But when the GM just gets to damage you for free, it does feel cheap, and I don't like doing that. I'm more for like rule of cool and like incorporating the moment and complications in a situation. Like if you're running through a bog, maybe you can start to get sucked into it. But a lot of that, I feel like you have to signpost beforehand. In this case, it was a fun thing I thought of in the moment, and I had to spend a resource. You know, it's kind of like essentially sacrificing an enemy to attack to do that. So I didn't feel as bad doing that, because you get to, as a GM, the fear mechanic for me allows you to interact in ways you might normally not, because of this idea of being unfair to the players. So yeah, I find that the fear mechanic and the lack of initiative actually works so much better. It doesn't work well for people that like the rigidity of combat and like to know when they're going and the time to prepare, who kind of are very anxious about jumping in. It works for people, for very quiet groups maybe, but for this, yeah, I think if you've got players that love to like be creative, and like you want that fluid combat, Daggerheart is going to be a system that you'll like. I know this is kind of like developed a little bit into a review of the system and how to play, but it's not. I'm just kind of going over my first impressions, things that I've really enjoyed, things that have stood out to me about the game. Other things to make note of is there are environmental stat blocks as well, like from a local tavern to a forest vale or whatever it might be. All these different locations have like stat blocks that you can use, that have like special fear mechanics, or they have special things that you might use, like references. Like one thing is spend a fear to start a pub brawl. So rather than me just being in a game, the players are role playing, and I decide, hey, I'm just gonna have a fight break out, which you can do, I guess. In this case, it feels like you've got it on there, and you go, do you know what? Randomly, I spend a fear, a fight breaks out. What are you guys doing? Because it's kind of like a complication. It works even better if they're like in the middle of an important negotiation. Then it doesn't feel quite as like cheap, because I'm using my resource, and that's what it's designed for. You know, I have restrictions, and for a player that feels like what they maybe as a GM, the player has restrictions. which inevitably makes the game more fair, or feel more fair at the very least. But yeah, I really love that mechanic. I haven't even gone into the Session 0 stuff because I haven't really had a chance to kind of touch on that. But as part of the Session 0s, unless you're playing an established world, the GM is encouraged to give the players the map, and the players go around and like point on the map and describe a location there. There's a lot about interconnectivity, so like players are encouraged to make connections between their characters before the game starts. A lot of this isn't necessarily tied to the mechanics of Daggerheart, and you could use that for literally anything else, but I bring it up here because it is very, very much kind of tied into to what Daggerheart is about. It's a narrative storytelling game with some really interesting like mechanics. I haven't even delved into like how combat like properly works in terms of like trying to hit people, but that's, I think, maybe if I ever do like a breakdown video, I don't think I would necessarily go into super depth with that in a review, because overall I would be talking about how the mechanics work to make a good game. But in the future, if people are interested, maybe I'll do a breakdown video on Daggerheart mechanics and how different parts of it work. I know I've said I'll do that with 5e and I haven't really got around to doing it, but I will do it eventually. I do promise I'll do it eventually. But yeah, well guys, this is a very long video, very long first impressions. Overall, I would say if you love narrative storytelling, if you love the idea of not having combat be an initiative and fluid combat, if you love the idea of characters world building with you and roleplay based mechanics, like literally mechanics, and I didn't even mention stress, by the way. Stress is another thing from hit points, which is really, really useful. When a player fails with fear, you can like have them mark a stress, or succeeds with fear, they might mark a stress. I guess you could do it in either way. When they get fear, make them mark a stress, but yeah, you might also, if they fail a check with hope, for example, you might say to them, I will let you succeed on this check if you mark a stress. So like, there's stuff like that that can happen. In any way, yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this video, guys. Hope it's been informative and helped you kind of get an idea of what Daggerheart is if you're completely unfamiliar with it. But yeah, if you did enjoy the video, guys, make sure to drop a like, consider subscribing, press the bell icon as well to be informed when I upload. Get in the comments, guys, get in the comments, and you know, let me know if you've played Daggerheart yet. Or if it interests you, what you liked about what it sounded like, if you've never heard of it before and it sounded intriguing, what you thought you liked, what you thought maybe doesn't work very well. I'm a big supporter of it, I'll be honest, I'm a big supporter. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, guys. I will see you in the next one. Take care, bye bye.